I'd like to welcome everyone to this webinar, Interoperability in BIM, which is sponsored by construction software specialist Viewpoint. I am Thomas Lane, the technical editor of Building Magazine. The ability to share data from different software platforms within BIM is crucial for successful collaboration. But incompatibility between the different software packages needed to develop a design within BIM has been a sticking point for many years. Interoperability is essential to allow project teams to freely share and access information. In this webinar, our panel will discuss the benefits of interoperability and how this is evolving and improving. So today I'm joined by 5 speakers. Andrew Brennan, the product manager for Europe and the Middle East and Africa from Viewpoint. Richard Kelly, the operations director of Building Smart, which has campaigned for open international standards for industry software solutions. Nigel Davies, the founding director of BIM consultancy Evolve. And Greg Johnson, the managing director, and his colleague Barry Peniston, the technical director of Structural Engineers Solve Structural Design. So the format of today's session is each speaker will present for a few minutes, then we will discuss the issues and take questions from you, our audience. So in terms of what each person will be covering, Barry Peniston will speak first and from an industry practitioner's perspective on how interoperability has evolved over the last 10 years and the impact on their workflow. Nigel Davies will discuss the pros and cons of proprietary versus open software formats from a BIM consultant's perspective. Then Richard Kelly will outline the benefits of interoperability between software platforms with a couple of project examples. And finally, Andrew Brennan will talk about interoperability issues from the software developer's perspective. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over first to Barry, who will talk for a few minutes. Thank you, Barry.
Hi everyone, my name is Barry Peniston. I'm Technical Director for Solve Structural. We are a structural engineering consultancy, as Thomas said, and over the last 10 years, we've specialised mainly in 3D reinforcement design and detailing, using BIM platforms available. The first rebar job that we did was about 10 years ago, and it was the London 2012 Olympic Velodrome. And we are now heavy users of Trimble products, Tekla Structures, Tekla Designer, and Trimble Connect. 10 years ago, when we did our first full rebar project, it was a different scene to today. The initial models that we received were of small areas. They were in a 3D DWG format that was not very usable for us, so we had to trace over the top of. And then gradually the consultant was too busy to keep issuing models, so we had to finish off modeling ourselves so we could do the rebar. And then for the duration of the project, there was no collaboration really with 3D modeling or discussions over the models. Now today we see a completely different picture, and 95% of all our projects we get very good models right from the beginning, from all sectors of the project. We get multiple file formats, so IFC being our preferred option, but then Revit and DWG and DGN and NWD. The 3D models are continuously reviewed by all members of the team right through the project, which is far removed from what was 10 years ago. And we do regular meetings, and the 3D models are always the focus of that meeting and the center point for discussion. And the models are throughout the job are very easy to be accessed by all the team, which has been a big help on various devices. So what we think has helped with this is great collaboration between software vendors. The big one being that we know Autodesk and Trimble have been discussing interoperability, and this has helped massively with getting files in and out of the Tekla and into Revit. The IFC file format was around 10 years ago, but we've seen massive improvements in that, in the reliability of information that's been coming through in the exports. The increase in model viewers now available is also great, because it gives everybody a choice of what they want to use, and not just the only option. And the final point being that digital collaboration is now the norm, as we know, for all sectors. So being able to collaborate over the models is really good for us. So our workflow has benefited massively because of these changes. Traditionally, 10 years ago, we would produce our drawings. We would get comments back. The comments changes were made, and then the rebar was ordered, delivered to site, and then quite often there was problems found on site, not necessarily down to bad detailing, but issues in site restrictions, congestion, things that shouldn't be there, and this always caused delays and could be dangerous if rebar needed to be cut. Today's workflow is we produce preliminary models from the information we get. We open up discussions then with the design team, the clients, the site team, everybody involved, to start ironing out any potential problems early on. When all that process is complete, we issue a full set of drawings and schedules, and generally they're approved much quicker because of the modelling process has already been approved. And then the bars are ordered, delivered and installed in a much better and faster process. So common problems we find with file exports is particularly in rebar from other software houses. We've found that the rebars can start to become deformed in the export. If we've got time at the end, I'll open up Trimble Connect to show a few examples of this. And geometry sometimes gets misinterpreted. Common issues that we now regularly pick up on, which didn't in the past, and this is mainly due to different modelling disciplines being brought together. Drainage is one big one. Most of the drainage generally passes through sides of reinforcement, and bars can be displaced. But quite often we're seeing drainage runs that run through the top or the bottom of the steel cage, and there's not much you can do about that other than raising or lowering the drainage. Another one is temporary works is a massive one. So we're quite often seeing now temporary works models being issued to us, and we can identify areas of permanent structure that we can produce, create pockets around, so that they can be removed later on and patched up. And finally, structural steel models. Traditionally, we get the basic steel models without any connections, but now quite often getting fabrication models which show all the bolts and connections, and we can start identifying clashes that wouldn't have been picked up previously, and that allows us to avoid any issues when they get to site. That's the end of my presentation. Thanks for your time, and I'll hand over back to Thomas.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Barry, for your presentation. Before we move on to Nigel, just a quick question, really. I mean, in the context of sort of collaboration digitally, how big an issue is interoperability for you these days? I think you're on mute, possibly, Barry.
Sorry, there we go. Yeah, it was a big issue previously. The interoperability now is so much better than it was. And what it's allowed is for much more people to be involved early on because of the interoperability. Previously, everyone uses their own software with their own file types, and they just didn't mix, and that was it. There was no option. But now to be able to bring them all together in things like Trimble Connect or a Viewpoint or other software types, it allows everyone to get together much quicker.
Great, well, thanks very much. So I'm now going to hand over to our next speaker, Nigel Davies, from, he's going to talk about the issues of interoperability from a BIM consultant's perspective. So thanks very much, Nigel.
Hi there, good morning everyone. I'm just going to take a couple of minutes just to talk about some of our experiences with interoperability, actually trying to make it work on projects, what the pros and cons are, and what the general arguments are for and against it in the industry. Myself, I've been involved with digital technology for many years now, 25 years in fact. I've been working doing this. It's one of the things I've always been involved in, is actually trying to push the adoption of technology forwards. Really don't want to take too much time talking about me, except to say there's a couple of hats I wear at the moment as well, which is for the UK BIM Alliance, particularly on the guidance documentation around the ISO standards, and they'll come into a couple of things that I say later. So in terms of working on a project, what is interoperability? And in the BIM framework, what it actually means is getting data from one piece of software to another. Or if you want to take it beyond that, getting data in a format that can be interpreted and understood by more than one person at a time. Now, in terms of kind of some of the typical software that we work with on a daily basis, what that can mean is the ideal opportunity for interoperability is to use the same file formats. That is always going to be the most technically sound way of getting information in, but it isn't always smooth sailing. Even between the same vendor, when we're talking about companies that have expanded and bought other software over 10, 20 years, even using the same formats between those isn't always smooth running. But clearly, the dedication to making those tools work is of commercial interest to those vendors. And that's where you're always going to see, if you're working with Revit, if you're going to with Autodesk, you probably want to be considering the DWG format, for example. If you're working with EcoSim and MicroStation, they both operate on the DGN platform. And over on Graphisoft, we've got the PLN side of things as well, if you're working between two people using the same software. But what happens then when you start to talk about multi-discipline and multi-software projects? The worst thing to do is to dictate what software a person uses, because you're using the right software for the way you're working, the type of work you're doing, and it may be very specialist. But in these terms, if you need to exchange one thing through to an Autodesk piece of software, yes, you're probably going to use the DWG. And let's face it, most products include some form of conversion to DWG. But then what if you actually also need to convert to a Bentley project? Straight away, you've got to support two file formats. And the reverse is true as well, is that you've got to expect the people you're exchanging with to be able to either give you a format that you can import or deal directly with your software format. So suddenly, instead of just having to support the one format, you're looking at multiple formats just to exchange data on a single project. But then what happens when you start to bring in other design tools, visualization tools, analysis products, even down to FM and specialist tools that we don't see all that much these days, but back in the tail end of the 90s, there was a big look to the aeronautical industry for certain types of software. How do we ensure that all of the software we're using can read all these file formats? Well, actually we can't. And that's where open data formats become so important. We can take out the confusion, we can look to trying to find a lowest common denominator, if you will, though it's not quite as simple as that, to provide common exchange between totally disparate platforms. And that's what we see from these initiatives, using things like IFC, COBie. It's about being able to guarantee that you can get the information to the person as they need it, regardless of both the type of software and the actual specific formats that they would normally work with. But why does it even matter? Well, as Barry's already explained, it has helped improve workflows, and there's always improvements going on. But if we look at, for example, ISO 19650 and the UK National Annex, it's already being specified. If anybody out there is looking to implement BIM on their projects, whether it's the old BIM level 2 or it's now the UK BIM framework, then you are going to be working with these kind of clauses. And if you just take a second to read that, in the UK National Annex of the ISO 19650 Part 2, it does actually say, unless specified to the contrary within the project information standard, exchange should include geometrical information in proprietary or open data formats, which is what I've talked about already, whether it's proprietary or open. But then also non-geometrical information in open data formats, structured in accordance with BS 1192 Part 4, soon to be ISO 19650 Part 4, which is COBie, and then documentation also in open formats. Now, it's strange as we move forward and we start to look at interoperability that we never have the discussion about open data formats. It's taken as a foregone conclusion. We're used to working with PDFs. We're used to working with spreadsheets. Open data formats in spreadsheets, you know, the docx and the XLX formats actually support open data. So we don't have that. It's part of our ethos already. But as soon as we come into looking at changing the way we work in terms of the geometric and non-geometrical information, suddenly we start to get common arguments appearing and why it's not possible or why it's not something that should be looked at. And as Barry's again explained, it is something that we need to get through, and we need to start looking at how it can improve our working. So here's just a couple of the common ones, just quickly. IFC doesn't work. Well, IFC does work because it's working perfectly for a lot of projects that we're working on. What we usually find is that IFC doesn't work is an excuse given when it's not understood properly, or the settings that are required to exchange IFC just haven't been set up correctly. That's probably 90% of the support calls that we get as a business to do with the exchange of IFC. It can be solved quite easily, but it's understanding. There is without a doubt a question of understanding that needs to be addressed. IFC files are huge. Well, so are many other file types. And actually what we've got to remember is that a lot of this comes down to the level of information that you're putting into the model. If you're detailing everything to a 1 to 2 level and you're putting every nut and bolt in, you're going to get larger files. So there's a payoff there. But the one thing we've got to remember is actually IFC is a very simple file format, and there are many tools out there to optimize them before they're exchanged. So if you're having anything to do with IFC files, go and download. Celebri's got a great one, Celebri Optimizer. Go and download an IFC optimizer, run it through your files, and you will see a change immediately, sometimes dramatic. COBie means you duplicate your work. Well, without a doubt, there is often an effort to getting COBie into the information formats that you need. But again, what we've got to try and remember is COBie should just be data that's already available. Now, the one thing we've also got to switch off from here is to try and remember that it's not just about us. If we're used to exchanging information as, let's say, material schedules or plant lists, equipment lists, that's sometimes siloed dumb data. We've got to look at the implications to the people who actually need it and how that information is going to be used later. And if we can make efficiency gains by using a different way of working that we haven't done before, there is a large benefit to realize within the work. You also need to think about what you're doing to generate COBie. If you're doing it within certain generation tools, yes, you may be duplicating information because of the way they work. But the one thing I will say there before we move on from this getting too technical is COBie should just be a visualization of the IFC file. If the data is correct and in the IFC file, you need to find a tool that will generate COBie directly from the IFC so that you know the two are totally and utterly in sync. COBie doesn't work for infrastructures, or IFC doesn't work for infrastructure is what we hear quite often. I'll leave that to just a quote from BS 1192 Part 4, which actually states it's a common structure for exchange of information, including both buildings and infrastructure. And in fact, if you look at the standards, they are written specifically certain text to actually pick up the differences between an infrastructure, a linear project, and a vertical project in buildings. Then the other one we get against it is more of a vendor-led approach, use our formats to leverage optimum functionality. Well, without a doubt, as I've said before, that is going to be of consideration, but that consideration needs to show and look at on your projects whether you need to be tied into one vendor or whether you need to have the best tool for the job. And if it's the best tool for the job, you really do need to be looking at how to implement open file formats, open data formats, and interoperability on your projects. I'll leave with just a couple of comments from the Construction Innovation Hub through CDBB's interoperability report that was published earlier in the year, and a couple of really important topics to bring out of that. One of them was an example of how interoperability costs against a single sample project. And this was just hypothesis and looking at examples, but it came to the conclusion that unnecessary costs attributable to poor interoperability, sorry, stumble over my words, would be of the order of 200 million per year. And there's another one there that, yes, interoperability actually needs further support. There is an evolving BIM mandate, again, we're looking at, but without a doubt, we need to be looking back to the government and to professional bodies to help this, vendors as well, to help support this and make sure that we can work in an open world rather than a closed and proprietary world, or at least have that clear choice. And also the other thing that we find quite often is there is a lack of digital skills within the sector. Particularly now, you know, with the way things have been the last year, yes, concentration has been on just keeping the head above water and getting projects out the door, but we need to start addressing the lack of digital skills and understanding of interoperability and the benefits and the challenges that it brings on a project. So that's me kind of covered. I'm sure we'll have questions later. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks very much indeed, Nigel. I mean, that figure of £200 million from the report is quite revealing. I mean, as a BIM consultant, I guess you're looking at a whole range of issues to do with sort of BIM adoption. I mean, issues around interoperability, is this a big part of your work? Is it a big challenge for you, or is it just not such a big deal?
Oh, it's a challenge on pretty much every project we work on. I mean, if we're talking, you know, our work, yes, it covers a wide range from the strategic, but when we're working on a project, it's always the first thing that needs to be considered, even down to its basic form. If we take interoperability as collaboration and being able to work with somebody else, even down to just making sure that you exchange information clearly between two practices, there's not one project we work on where there isn't a challenge of some description of that. And it's been the same through the CAD years and before, well, not before that on drawing boards, because that was quite easy, but it's never going away when two people are working with two pieces of software, unless we address this properly and look at a true open way of working.
Great. Well, thanks very much. That's neatly takes us on to our next speaker, Richard Kelly from Building Smart, who's going to really talk about the benefits of interoperability and what Building Smart are doing to make this easier. So thanks very much, Richard.
Good morning. Let me just get the right screen shared. Which isn't that one. Thomas, could you just confirm which screen we're seeing?
I can see your screen perfectly now.
Is it the full screen?
Yeah, the full screen. It's got your your name on it and Building Smart, so it looks like it's good to go.
Okay, good. All right, thank you. Okay, good morning, everybody. So let me just set the context of why I'm here. I work for an international alliance made up of member companies from the built asset industry, and we're open, neutral, and not for profit. And Building Smart's mission is to enable the full benefits of digital ways of working in the built asset industry. The demand supply cycle looks like this. The industry and the community have requirements for their built assets that need to be solved with open exchange of data. And the Building Smart International Standards Programme creates and delivers the open BIM standards based on something called the IRC format. And software vendors then use the output to produce interoperable software. The industry in turn is able to choose from multiple software platforms and know that they will have access to their data for the whole life of the asset and that they are not locked into a particular software vendor. And what holds all this together and gives the cycle the quality assurance, the cohesion and the agility is the BSI process. I mean, it also allows people from many companies all over the world to work together and achieve consensus when working out the right solutions. Here's some examples of where the demand is coming from. Many governments and state-owned industries and industry groups are mandating open BIM and IFC now. they obviously understand the strategic importance of open data standards, and they know that neutral standards are needed for strategic independence as well. More specifically to the UK, the National Infrastructure Commission want neutral standards for their digital twin, we're told. This slide here is showing you a list of typical open data standards, lots of acronyms for us, and they're confusing, but these can be interpreted like this, with a little bit of magic. There we go. And the benefits of this approach, of course, are independent control of your asset and portfolio data, strategic data flexibility, better whole life decision making, basis for the digital twin, transparency of the key indicators, improved quality and cost control, opportunity to save money, and it's non-proprietary data. Now we know we've got a fragmented industry with disconnected workflows and undefined processes. Digital adoption and open standards help us address this. So Open BIM is a collaborative vendor neutral process. It allows seamless collaboration for all the project participants, and it also facilitates interoperability to benefit new build and then throughout the asset life cycle. So essentially Open BIM is the glue that's going to make the ISO 19650 work. Now Building Smart, we operate at a practical level to make it happen. And we've got several domain programs that are delivering outputs through multiple standard development projects. And it's no longer just buildings. We have a lot of infrastructure work going on as well. The core of our workforce is pro bono. I'm an employee, but most of the people that are working in the projects are either work in kind or paid for on a contractual basis from the stakeholders and sponsors of the projects, from the philanthropic nature of the people that are interested in improving Open BIM for the industry. And does it work? Well, here's some examples, or here's a couple of examples of where it is working. This one here is a high-end housing project that was built on reclaimed land in Amsterdam. They mandated Open BIM, which helped them realize their design improvements, file sharing and coordination. And they also developed open exchangeable methodologies to enable, to help expedite the design and delivery. So there's a lot of really good solutioneering and decision making on this project. And you can also see the number of software platforms that were used in the design and build of it, which of course shows true interoperability. And then just finish off with a UK-centric one, Hinkley Point C Power Station. They mandated IFC in the design and delivery of the rebar, used IFC as a fully integrated contractual deliverable. They tell us that the method enabled improved workflows across different groups and organisations and ensured that the digital continuity went throughout the project phase, that particular project phase. So they tell us as a result, the automatic checking of the concrete and the rebar significantly improved the productivity and reduced the errors on site. So thank you, that's my 4 minutes.
Great, well, thanks very much, Richard. I just a question's just come in from one of our audience. It's something you might be able to help with. So someone's asked what they're not familiar with the term digital twin. Could you explain?
Well, I could give an explanation, and I'm sure we'll get another 10 during this call. The way I see it is the digital twin allows you to have a digital representation of the physical asset throughout the life cycle of that asset. It doesn't just represent the physicality of it, though. It represents, how it's operating and the connection of all the different systems that make up an asset and how it is being used and how you want to use it. I would see it along 3 axes. You've got the ability to look at a facility broken down into its systems levels, the assembly of parts, it's the aggregated parts and the product. You've got the ability to look along the whole life cycle, from concept through to lust to dust. You've got the ability to look up and down the supply chain from the owner operator and their objectives, all the way through the supply chain, and make links in a connected data environment, multiple connected data environments between all those different aspects on those three axes.
Great, well, thank you. And we'll see if we'll get some more questions on this subject later on. It's a big issue, so I'm sure we will. I had a question actually to do with IFCs. I mean, I know years ago there were issues with some software vendors being reluctant to embrace IFCs because they wanted their own proprietary standards to be used instead. Is this still an issue, or are you finding that software vendors now are very happy to integrate IFCs within their platforms?
We have a good number of software vendors in our membership base. All the big ones that you can think of are all contributing on the projects that are currently developing IFC. And I have to say, a lot of the smaller software houses are really quite agile as well and joining in. What the software vendors will tell us is that what they need is the owner operators to relinquish core data so that they can do proper validation of the standards that are being produced, so that they can then provide something meaningful. So short answer to your question is no, we're seeing everybody joining in. In fact, our membership base is pretty much a third software vendors, a third industry owners, and a third AEC supply chain, which is a nice mix.
And I guess mandating IFCs internationally must be a huge boost for you to help get that adoption. Yeah.
Obviously, if it comes top down, then the supply chain all falls in line. That's a boost for us. I mean, I'm just an employee in the building smart management office. We're a very small core team, and we operate the business on behalf of the international community. So we exist because the community exists. It's a community-led enterprise.
Right, great. Well, thanks very much, Richard. We'll come back sort of in a bit for the questions. So we've got one more speaker now. Andrew Brennan is going to talk about interoperability issues from the software developer's perspective. Andrew is the product manager from Viewpoint. So Andrew, over to you.
Hi Thomas, morning everyone. Just to check, I'm loud and clear, everyone can hear me all right?
Indeed, yeah, we can see your screen.
Lovely, okay. So hi, good morning. So I'm Andrew, I'm product manager for Viewpoint. I can now say I've been with Viewpoint for nearly 9 years and in the IT industry for 20 now. But bottom line is, yeah, passionate about good software, and I want to talk to you about the challenges that we face as a vendor, and how we're thinking about things in the software space, in construction software specifically, to kind of break down these barriers of interoperability and certainly integration as well. We kind of want to look at it in two ways, specifically internally, where we can go after integration between our products, and then externally where we need to be interoperable and need to work to those open standards with those so many information flows that come out of a common data environment and field tools that Nigel mentioned. And we really want to kind of stay true to those open standards, those defined principles in ISO 9650, and develop the tools that focus on those exchange formats, such as IFC, BCF, and then have PDF tools and other tools as well that bring in some of the other formats, of course, but really focus on those open standards. Because yeah, even internally, even amongst kind of our ecosystem here, it's a challenge. It's a challenge that we face. We've got a lot of work in front of us to kind of bring this all together. With all of these flows between these kind of tools, again, just in-house, not to mention all of the many plugins and other kind of routes with API development that we see, and the connection of specialist tools that we must develop to. It's our responsibility to integrate where our customers might choose a specific tool to do a specific job. We've got the API capability and the know-how to obviously to integrate and connect that workflow, connect that work stream. This is kind of our view on where we need to go, where things are headed. I think good news in the kind of the IT industry as a whole as well is there's a lot of positive movement towards a more interoperable and a more integrated type experience, and even, you know, right at the macro level. Sometimes innovation is not always a good thing, especially when, you know, you kind of want a baseline to be interoperable with. And there's some major factors moving in the right direction towards a more integrated, a more interoperable workspace in software in general, and specifically obviously in construction software. We see Moore's law slowing down, so that the development of computer chips, we're not doubling every 2 years anymore. We've got a kind of a set size for desktop computers that's kind of settling down a little bit. We're seeing tremendous development in the mobile arena, with the lines being blurred between mobile and desktop applications. We look at, you know, Apple's new M1 chips and the ability to load mobile apps on the desktop. Windows developing on the ARM infrastructure and going more mobile and partnering with Android. We've got the power of the cloud, of course, with all of those kind of services syncing. But yeah, I'm genuinely excited about, you know, the next few years, especially to see those developments kind of filter down from the big technology companies and the architecture and the infrastructure as to what we can do in Viewpoint and Trimble, and connect and serve this kind of integrated experience. So yeah, I guess to surmise, I think technology's going to keep moving in the right direction. There's a genuine recognition towards, you know, more interoperability, more integration at a very macro level. And then when we have, you know, more and more use of open standards, we see some of the success stories that Barry and Nigel mentioned earlier. We talked about Hinkley Point C and their use of Viewpoint and Connect on site, that huge construction project. So we're seeing more and more success, more and more implementation and use of the core face of those open standards, which is fantastic to see. So yeah, that's our view on it. It's a challenge that we need to solve, and that, yeah, we're fortunate that we can listen to arenas such as this and our customers who are leaders in this environment, to kind of inform us as vendors what we need to do, and where we need to go, and have that kind of open policy for integration and interoperability. I'll pause there and take any questions.
Right, thanks, Andrew. Before we move on to our general discussion, it's interesting you mentioned Apple's M1 chip and the issues around this. So this could be quite a big deal. For those that aren't familiar with this, it's basically Apple are moving away from the Intel architecture they used for quite a long time now to the same sort of processor technology that's used in iPads and iPhones. So Andrew, I mean, is that a big deal for you? I mean, do you have to rewrite all your software? No,
I mean, we can move with it. It's not a kind of underlying platform rewrite, but for the industry, I think it's huge. It cannot be understated. So this is, before you had distinctly desktop environments architecture, and then separate mobile architecture. The mobile architecture now is so fast that it can be both, and you can have an ARM architecture device running your desktop, and then that also has the mobile capabilities. So once we kind of get to that stage, then all of your mobile apps and your mobile ecosystem are available on the desktop. Those lines are going to become even more blurred, and we're moving towards kind of one experience really in using a device. It's not that separation between I've got this thing on my phone and this thing on my desktop anymore. We see Microsoft making the same moves as well. So yeah, I personally think it's huge. I'm really excited about it, as to, you know, the opportunity that it gives us to build experiences that are a single experience as well. So yeah, moving in the right direction, definitely the IT industry in general towards this.
And from that, I can take it that, I mean, another issue has been, you know, maybe not so much such a big deal now, but certainly was a few years ago. It's a difference in compatibility between software developed for Apple products and those for Windows. Is this still an issue?
And less of an issue. So we can develop on an open platform called Xamarin that creates apps for both Apple and Android with the same amount of effort. So there's recognition and there's tools in place to prevent duplicate effort and the need to maintain two separate platforms. So there's a reasonable amount in place today already, but that's only going to get better as well.
Okay, well, great. Well, thanks very much, Andrew. We're now going to open up a discussion to all our panelists, so I can invite them all to put your cameras and put your microphones back on and join us. So thanks very much for your presentations. I mean, I got one question here from one of our audience. Essentially, what it boils down to is we've talked about IFCs and interoperability. We've also talked about COBie and interoperability. Could somebody just explain what the difference is and the shortcomings of COBie versus IFCs, maybe?
Shall I take that one?
Nigel, yes, please do.
So in simple terms, IFC is a graphical representation of the information with the data embedded in it. COBie, take the graphical part out, it is just a textual representation of the information, usually seen as a spreadsheet, because again, that's an easily understood one. That's what I always describe to people in a nutshell. IFC is graphics plus the data. COBie is just the data. Right,
I see. So I mean, cost data you could share with COBie presumably, or
that's one of the main things. I mean, typically people look to COBie as the handover from design to operations. It's got other benefits. There's other uses for it throughout the construction phases and the design phases, but that's typically when you see it, or when we see it, is that people are handing over asset information to the client for FM purposes at the end. They can take that data, import it either directly or through slight, reworkings of the format into the FM software they're using.
Okay, thank you. I mean, our presentations have made it quite clear that we've seen massive strides towards greater interoperability in the last few years. There's all sorts of exciting new technology coming along as well. So, I mean, what would you say as a panel is the big challenges left before we get to true seamless interoperability?
Understanding, I'll throw that one out there. I think even now we're having these webinars. We're still educating people both on the consumer side and the vendor side into how it needs to be used and the commercial benefits of it. We're still having those discussions. That's what we need to do. Get everybody to understand.
I would agree. The technology already exists by and large. It comes down to the people that can influence understanding what is possible, as well as what the benefits are and what they need to do to join in. We're seeing more and more enlightened organisations, but not enough yet. And that's because we're not explaining it well enough yet, frankly.
We've been involved in a large infrastructure project over the last few years in the UK that we were employed because of our 3D and BIM capability, but then the models were completely ignored for a long time until somebody realised that they were there and they started to be used and people realised the benefits of them. But before then, it was like it was just a paper exercise. And again, that was just misunderstanding or lack of knowledge that they were there, really. So
from that, as I take it, it's not interoperability is not so much an issue. It's more to do with just BIM adoption.
Education, yeah.
Right.
Maybe.
I think one of the problems has been in the last few years is that the EIRs that the clients have been putting out, or the BIM execution plans, have just been templated to a certain degree. They haven't really looked at how the information is really being used throughout the design and the life cycle of the project. So you may have got in, Barry's case there, you may have got the client asking for IFC and not using it. Well, if they weren't going to use it, don't ask for it. We've got to make sure that we're being practical and pragmatic about the implementation of any of this stuff, and it's got to have a purpose. It's got to have a reason for it, and that's the trick. It's helping people understand the inputs and the outputs.
I think when we were taken on to do the 3D detailing and modelling, I think there was every intention, but then that never really got filtered down to the teams, and they didn't even know the models existed until we opened one up in a meeting, and suddenly, what's this? Can we have these for everything? And we're, well, yeah, we've modelled the whole project. Yeah, what do you want? So it was just a lack of knowing that they existed from the client end, I think, really.
I think an important part of that was that the high-level management did insist that the suppliers were capable of producing the BIM models. They then didn't get used properly for a while, as Barry's just said, but because it was insisted upon in the first place, eventually through the lifetime of the project, it did show some improvement. So I guess if it hadn't have been written in the high-level contracts, that process would never have happened. So, I mean, if this all came originally from the government's sort of doctrine that any of their projects had to have BIM on, and everybody jumped on it quite quickly. So that's been a massive help in our experience. I mean, we were trying to do it 10 years ago to make our own work as clean as possible and as efficient as possible. But it really helped when the government jumped on board and enforced the issue.
I mean, just thinking, I mean, maybe I'm misunderstanding this, but surely, when it comes to sort of sharing information, can't all this be automated? I mean, I just simply export a file, for use for someone else to import into their sort of BIM model, and it just automatically does it, maybe in the proprietary format and in an IFC format as well, and the other package kind of works out the best thing to do to get all the data into that model.
It's becoming more that way, yeah. But unfortunately, we've had a transition period where, as well as the BIM information being produced, the old-fashioned style 2D deliverables have been produced, as I would say. So people have had a tendency to go straight to them, and sort of the fact that they've been developed through a BIM strategy and a BIM process, they weren't feeling the benefit of that for a while, but that's definitely now, it's switched over now. The balance has changed such that the BIM is the driving force now, I would say, on most significant size projects in the UK.
The other issue is people being bothered to learn new things. And it's simple as that. Right from the beginning of the project, we were uploading all our models to Trimble Connect. Most people don't even create logins when you send them invites, and so that, again, it's down to the education of letting people know that if you do this, you will have access to all this information. We tried, but you can only try for so long. Generally, we find that when people see the models and the information that they could have, it suddenly changes overnight. Suddenly you get an influx of people registering for the project because the word passed around that these models are there. So I think that's generally how we find it. The information is always there and it is automated, like you say, but it's people knowing they're there and wanting to use them which is getting more common. It is.
Yeah, I think it's a fairly piecemeal approach in a lot of cases, and I think fundamentally organisations probably first have to define their line of sight from their corporate objectives all the way through their asset plans, and then down to the the operations of design, build, operate. And what they're lacking is that line of sight, as I say, but also the ability to share the information up and down it. So the people that are defining BIM on a project, and as Barry says, they ask for it and then never look at it again or don't use it. It's because they don't know how it feeds back up to the corporate objectives about how they're going to use that asset for the next 100 years. Yeah. I think one of the duties we've got as people who are working in the interoperability area is to define how interoperable data can support whole life asset management. Because I think that part of the work isn't done yet. I don't think we've explained that well enough yet. Well, I know we haven't. We've got an initiative working actually in my organisation at the moment to get the community together to define that, put a white paper together. And sorry.
I was going to say, Richard, I mean, just picking up and sorry to interrupt you, but on that point, I mean, looking at asset management, you're looking at a whole different load of software packages, aren't you? You're looking at sort of CAD management packages. I mean, are those vendors, it's not really construction so much, are they embracing IFCs? Is it sort of becoming easier for that data to come from, you know, the industry side, the BIM data, into that data set used to operate the building? And
many are. I mean, that's the whole point of interoperability, isn't it? Is that different parts of the asset lifecycle use traditionally different software packages, and they require different sorts of information. So interoperability is that ability to share data across the different software packages. I won't say without losses, but with the appropriate data for that phase of the asset lifecycle. You know, so we talked about COBE a minute ago. That's based on IFC. It's the ability to, you know, share the information about equipment over into the operating model, and so on and so forth. You know, and as an asset owner, you want to be able to have the choice about which software packages you use, or more to the point, you want to be able to engage lots of other organizations that are all using their own choice of software package, and know that they will be interoperable, and know that you'll be able to get access to the crucial data for decision making about cost and performance, and, you know, levels of performance, and, you know, to match the risk appetite of your business for whatever it is, 100 years, say, which is not unreasonable length of time for building, I guess.
I think Richard's hit it on the head from my perspective there. It's being sure, being absolutely confident that your information can be understood and interpreted. I think in terms of FM, you know, not all the platforms are integrated with COBE or IFC yet, but they all have it on their radar. Every single one we deal with has either got a plugin for it or is considering it or dealing with it. But from a kind of looking at it where those platforms don't, if we're working with a standard format such as COBE, it's easier to make it work and import into them. Most of them will understand a CSV file or, you know, something like that. If you know the data is consistent and it's complete, the job's done. It's so much, well, it's not done. It's a lot easier, as you said earlier, to automate it, Tom. It's common standards, common platforms, common formats makes everybody's life more, the word has gone out of my head now, but confident, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, everyone's kind of like got the same mutual interests, haven't they? Obviously, the FM tools, you know, they're on commercial interest as well as the benefit to the asset owners. Just to add to that, from a software perspective, an FM tool is not something that you change every, you know, 2 or 3 years. So there's a way where, you know, these asset owners are really invested in an FM tool, and then that defines their client requirements to construction companies for the delivery of a project. And it's very difficult to automate something that is specifically different each time. We can make things easy, build good experiences on top of that, but it's difficult to automate something to that degree. But yeah, as these FM tools start and develop more to these open standards, and yes, you mentioned, you know, COBE's on the radar, everyone's kind of doing it. As you know, the next cycle come around and these tools are selected again, when companies start to see the benefit, I think we will see, you know, one of those generational leaps of interoperability. Once, you know, it's the FM tool that's kind of defining that, you know, filters down very quickly. So again, I think we're on the cusp. We're on the cusp of something.
Okay. And I mean, the Centre for Digital Built Britain's report on interoperability was actually mentioned, wasn't it? And if I understand that correctly, they're talking about a common standard to get rid of that £200 million a year cost of interoperability being an issue. What's the panel's view on this, on what they're calling for, and the idea that this is integrated into the BIM mandate? Is it going to help?
It's essential. I think we need, just like we had in 2012 to 2016, the initial BIM mandate actually specifying that all publicly procured or centrally procured projects would be delivered to BIM level 2 as it was then. I think we need the move now to start pushing that. Private industry came very quickly on the heels of that, and actually we're seeing as much adoption now, or more probably so, in the private sector than we are in the public sector. We need that driver again. and it needs to be more so than it has been before, that it's just BIM. It needs to specify that the processes and procedures outlined in the 19650 series to become standard place for everyone.
Okay. Richard, what's your view on it? Because I assume that they're going to, I don't know, am I wrong about this, but IFCs will probably be the bedrock of this.
Well, I'd imagine so. I mean, as Nigel says, it's essential. I mean, it's always very, very useful when top-level mandates an approach. Obviously, I'm representing international. I'm not representing just UK. And I showed a slide earlier that demonstrated mandates from around the world, where governments and industry bodies are specifying the use of open BIM, and actually quite often specifying the use of an IFC-based approach. The CDBB is a very well thought out document. It's got some relatively high level altruistic aims in it, which is good, because it's, we do need to, take account of the world we want to live in. It's built up industry is the industry that's contributing 39% or thereabouts to greenhouse gases, which is far more than any part of the industry, of other things. It's very unproductive, and we're not going to do this until, we're not going to improve it until there's a common thought piece and direction from the very top that says we've got to sort this out. And the paper does that. It specifies a methodology for doing that. So I'm pleased to see it, obviously.
Good. Got a question here from the audience about global, GUIDs, globally unique identifiers, as obviously another level of information within, I don't know, a BIM object, where it's going to be, particularly important on infrastructure projects. Do IFCs cater for this? Is this a challenge?
As far as I know, I'm not a digital person, but as far as I know, they do, and that's part of their part of the attraction of it. Within IFC, you can specify an object in terms of its relationship to other objects and the space it sits in, and then use the GUIDs to identify it. I'm suspecting Nigel probably knows more about that than I do. Maybe I'm on the spot.
No, they are supported. I think one of the things I alluded to in the presentation was to make sure the settings are correct. And you need to make sure, if you're using an object within 2 different platforms, or you're just exporting it, that the GUID is constant. But it's in 9 times out of 10, 90 times out of 100, it's handled for you and it's identifiable.
Okay.
That is true of exporting from Tekla. By default, a lot of the export attributes are not ticked.
Yep.
So if you just exported it out of the box, and then you look in Trimble Connect at all the different the attributes, there's only a limited amount, but every bit of data that's in that model can be exported if you pick it. So it definitely is like you said about if you don't set the right settings, you're not going to get the right answer. So
I think part of the issue there is to try and identify an object in human readable terms first,
yeah.
And make sure you know what you're working with through a component, a type, a location, so that you don't have to necessarily deal with long strings of data, unless you're working on the interpretation side and actually doing data analysis. That's different. But on the day-to-day design and construction, try to identify the object using other methods before you have to resort to the GUID.
Okay. I've got time for one more quick question, really, which really, I think two people have identified the fact that a building lasts for 100 years, and you're going to be using this data to manage it. Well, software changes all the time. New programs come out. They have different exchange formats. So in terms of the long term and the challenges of integrating all these software packages together, do IFCs and the equivalent have longevity? If I go back to 50 years time, I go back to a piece of software which has got the data in it about a building, and I need to find out how some obscure valve works or something like that, am I just going to hit a brick wall, or is this something that will always work for the foreseeable future?
Well, I think that's part of the exciting side of it. it sounds like a lot of work, what we're talking about, all the interfaces and data, etc. But what you're heading towards is a lot more use of augmented reality. So as you approach that valve on site, it's not a question of going back to the office and looking up some old IFCs or through some Excel spreadsheets or whatever. That anything you need to know about that valve will be in front of your face, including the insides of it if you want. So, you know, it's important to remember what the end game is with all this. We're probably a long way from it, and we may not see the benefits of that through our careers. I don't know, but it's certainly the foundations of that. And if we don't get to grips with the modeling now, and the correct exchange of data, you know, we'll never get to where people are trying to get to, I think. A lot of these augmented reality tools, etc., they're available now. They're there. We've seen them. They're very exciting, but they're not everyday use yet, you know.
Okay, well, brilliant. Well, I think that just takes us to the end of the session. So I'd like to say thanks very much to everybody for participating. And just to our audience, if you want to hear this again, it will be available to download on demand. So thanks to everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.